All right. All right. Well, good evening. Thanks for everybody who are joining us, and hopefully we'll have some late arrivals also, which is totally fine. My name is Stacy, and I am a physical therapist at the Outpatient Center on Commerce Avenue. And we have with us tonight Jody Barnett, who is also a physical therapist. We are members of the Lyme and Tick Disease Support Group. We're really excited and so very thankful to Aaron from the library for helping us out, and to Corey Childs, who's here tonight from the Extension office right here in Front Royal. So we're gonna turn it over to him real quickly. Thank you, Corey, and talk a little bit about ticks.
Glad to be here, and thanks for asking me to come. We're going to try to go over some basic information that I hope everybody finds to be useful in just understanding what ticks we have, what their repro situation is, their life cycle. Maybe if you look at the state in our area, determine how much trouble we have, and then some prevention kind of things that really are important to trying to reduce your incidence of Lyme and many other diseases. So while we were setting up, we were having a few difficulties, and I hope this works. Basically, when you think about ticks, you need to remember a couple things. They're here, and they can be found almost everywhere. And then the question is, well, what do you need to know? If you look at the ticks right up here on the screen, what you're going to find is the black-legged tick or the deer tick. This is probably the most important tick for us to know about because of Lyme. It is also a very hard one to ID most of the time. When you look at these guys, they're not very big. When you look at that, as you go across the spectrum, you have the adult female, which is usually the larger one, has a body that has a half shield on its back, which is darker to almost black in color, and then has a red sort of abdomen or bottom half. The adult male is a little smaller, as you can see, going to be black or very dark red in color. Then the nymphs and larvae are exceedingly smaller. I mean, it's not uncommon at all to find times during the year when they're in the larva stage or just starting the nymphs when they're no bigger than the head of a pin. And they're really hard to identify, really hard to basically find, unless you're consistently really diligent in what you're looking for. A bit more about them. The unfed black-legged ticks have a reddish body. And you saw that in the picture that we showed. It stays reddish and dark brown for the shield until they become engorged with blood. Then that additional red color will make them much darker color. So that's one way to determine how long they've really been on you, or whether they have truly bitten you and been able to start the process of change of fluids. The males are usually a little smaller. They're not much bigger than 1/8 of an inch long. They have black legs, which is how they got their name. They're dark brown to black in color. And essentially the nymphs and some of the adults will feed on humans. And that's when we really have to worry about when they're going to be in the stages where they can transmit things as well. When they're little, they like to feed on mammals or birds. In the larval and nymph stage, they move up to white-tailed deer, although they feed on or can feed on a variety of mammals. Black-legged ticks are the most common ticks in Virginia that spread Lyme. They can also spread anaplasmosis and Blossom virus. They're not nearly as common as Lyme is. And what you can basically think about, if you wanted to look at, if you were going to say, I found 5 ticks on me, then 50% of those ticks, or probably 3, could potentially be a carrier of one of these diseases. And that's why it's really important that you find them all and find them as soon as you can. If you want to talk about when they're most active, they're really throughout the year, with adults and nymphs that are in different stages of growth throughout the year. But we're going to talk about it here in just a minute when the most common time is where we find most of our problems. Most people are diagnosed with issues. We also have the Lone Star tick here in Virginia, and here's a picture of it. It's much more red in color, and you'll notice that the really determining factor is that dot or spot in the middle of a shield. And the Lone Star tick really gets its name from the common characteristic of a white or yellow spot. Only adult female Lone Star. Both males and females are red in color, or reddish brown in color, and somewhere between an eighth and a quarter of an inch long. So they're a little bit larger, much easier to find. The male Lone Star ticks do not have the spots, so you might not be able to identify them simply based on the spot. So it's important to learn about their shape and their color and their size, and try to know when you find a tick which type that it is. For the most part, they don't transmit Lyme. They do tularemia and ehrlichiosis. Or they're common diseases that they transmit, but they don't transmit Lyme disease, and they will feed on most any mammal that happens to be around. So dogs, pets, people, horses, cows, whatever happens to be there. And they're most active in April, basically April through August. Then many people find these abundantly around the home and around their property, and particularly on their dogs. And that's the American dog tick. And you can tell that it's red, but it has a little bit more veining color to it. It can be much more, use the term loosely, but it's more attractive because it has more design to it in the way that it looks. They're also a little larger. They're brown. They're almost a quarter inch long. They can be much longer when they're engorged. They can get very puffy. And if you saw the picture on the opening slide, that was an engorged dog tick. And most of us have seen those on dogs or other things from time to time. They can really be distinguished from deer ticks by their size and by some off-colored white markings on their legs. So you're not going to find that on deer ticks or on the Lone Star. Dogs are the preferred host of the dog tick, which is how it got its name. But they will feed on medium to large other animals or mammals like humans. The immature stages feed on smaller animals, talking about rats and mice and things like that. Squirrels, little smaller creatures. And then as they grow and continue to develop, they get much larger and move up in their eating preferences. The one real problem we have in Virginia is this is the tick that really transmits Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So that's why we get concerned about them. And I don't mean to say that you shouldn't have to worry about them. It's not quite as common as Lyme, but it is something that people, if they don't get diagnosed and treated, they can have trouble with it as well. They're active mostly March through September. And in this case, only the adults are known to bite humans. So you're probably not going to find the larval or nymph form on a human being. You might find it in clothes, it might be crawling on you, but it probably is not going to attach. Now, here's another one that you may or may not have heard about. And it was just recently identified in the area. Well, now it's been 2.5 years ago. And that's the Asian longhorn tick. And there's a lot that's not known about this tick. It came from Southeast Asia. It is a huge problem in livestock, and particularly in livestock in New Zealand and Australia and over in Asia. It can transmit, it's been known to carry or serve as a vector for a number of diseases. And here in this country, it was first found in basically a couple of locations, and two of them were in Virginia. One was in Albemarle County, one happened to be here in Warren County, down along the river, close to the inland port. So you kind of narrow down the area of the county where it was found. Then it was also found over in Middletown in the county. So you have to look at it and say, well, it really isn't, specific. There are some things we don't know. Right now, we haven't known it to be a vector for any diseases that affect people, but we do have major issues with a couple of different diseases that are starting to impact cattle particularly, but they've been found on sheep, they've been found on cows, horses, and lots of different types of mammalian species. And there's a lot of research going into it. They're what's called a hard shell tick, kind of like the others. They look a little different. And they really have clusters. So, I mean, when you walk through the woods or you walk out through a field or into underbrush, where one has laid a lot of eggs and you have a lot of nymphs or in the area, larvae in the area, you could get attacked by thousands of them. I've seen cases where cows' faces were covered up in them, and you pull literally thousands off of them to get it clean. So they are able to produce without a male, and that most of the other ticks cannot do that, and it makes them twice as hard to control. But at this point, I would say just be aware that they're out there, and just understand you're going to have to double up on your prevention methods to try to stop any ticks from bothering you or in becoming involved in your daily activities. But much more to come. Like I said, there's a lot of research being done here. It is new to the area. It's in New Jersey. It's in a couple other states. It seems to be moving along various interstate travelways. So like down 81, across 66, over 77s, stuff like that. Can't prove that that's the way it goes, and there's been no real scientific proof that some of the disease transmission is related to it. It just happens to be a commonality, and right now it's a point of emphasis for research. This is a little older chart, again, just showing the different looks to the ticks, and has their different stages. It doesn't have the longhorn tick on it because it hasn't been put out yet publicly, but it will eventually. There'll be 4. And if you happen to look at various places in various charts from around the country, there are different ticks in different regions. So our ticks aren't necessarily exactly the same that you're going to find in the Northeast, Northwest, and so forth. The tick life cycle is basically pretty simple. And anybody who knows anything about insects is going to pretty much follow this. And you have eggs, which then develop into larvae, which move into the nymph form and into the adult life cycle. And then they repeat themselves. The adults are what lays the eggs. It just kind of forms a circle and continues to come back and to haunt you for the most part. This gets a little more in depth into that. If you take the spring of the year, that's when most of the eggs are normally put out. They become larvae in the summer, and in some cases into the fall. And then they also become adults. And if you look at the way the graph is broken up into quadrants, and you have a spring, summer, fall, winter, and you'll notice that the little gray cloud is around people and the various mammals on the top relates to the nymph form, and that a nymph form to the adult section, as it goes down around the spinning wheel, is the raised risk of human infection, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be fighting. And that's really when we need to be concerned. There is some report that it can go out into the fall a little further. That really it's going to depend on environmental circumstances as much as anything. And it won't go very far into that. So what we really have to do is focus on being very concerned and doing the greatest detail in our protection plans or in our methods from spring and summer. Then you can also see some of the different co-hosts as you go around the wheel and what might serve as vectors for additional insects. So one of the questions I got was, when is tick season in Virginia? And I'd love to say it's only this period of time. But basically, they can be encountered at any time throughout the year. Generally in spring, summers, when they have the most issue with it, when it can be most dangerous. As I said, it can linger in the fall, but it's not uncommon to find them, in the winter if we have a warm winter, or late in the fall if we have a warm fall. Environmental conditions are right that they can become active, and we'll see with them. Ticks do not generally die off in the wintertime. They kind of hibernate, and that's not the scientific word for what they do, but essentially they slow their life support functions down, similar to bears, and they crawl into places that are more protected and try to stave off any real cold. And they just kind of overwinter until usually heat, and just, it doesn't have to be extreme heat, causes them to kind of pick back up and look to go through the feeding phase again. And generally, you'll notice here that it takes temperatures in the range of 35 degrees to slow activity. So, I mean, our past few winters here, we haven't had a whole lot of days that were down that low. When you talked about 24-hour periods of time, there were days when we had periods of time that would do that, nights or whatever, but they would warm up during the day, so your average day temperature was usually warmer than that. And what it takes to kill insects is usually a number of several sustaining days that are lower than 10 degrees, probably 17 degrees Fahrenheit. And when I talk about it's not 1 or 2 days, it's a couple of weeks. And what that means is that we are not going to experience that very often here in Virginia or here in Warren County. I wanted to show you a map, and this map's a little dated. It was created in 2012, but if you kind of follow me here for a second, the red dots basically show you where Lyme was indicated as really hot spots during that time, or up until that time. So you saw the far northeast, you saw the upper Midwest, you saw some hot spots in the around the District of Columbia area, and what they call Northern Virginia. Then you see some yellow around some of those places, and that was where it was starting to reach out and be found more often. Well, from 2012 to now, the numbers of cases have been really doubling, tripling, just really increasing, and the range of the ticks have been increasing as well. And now there's not really any place in Virginia that's considered low risk. There are some places that would be considered transitional areas between high risk and just an average risk. So things are changing, ticks are moving, and as people move and as things move around, the ticks are going to move with them. And environmentally, when you look at the situation of whether it's, who knows if it's man-made or if it's just general climate change. But our winters have traditionally been getting warmer, and our temperatures have been fluctuating a whole lot less and putting less stress on them. So the numbers for survivability for eggs and larvae and things going through the winter have been higher, which has increased the basic risk factors. This is another chart that was basically put out originally by the CDC. They broke the country up into different zones, and basically it's telling you what kind of risk there is for various tick diseases and how many ticks found of various species within those zones. And I know it's very hard to read. I couldn't pull it up anymore and make it look hefty on the presentation. But if you look down at the southeast where Virginia is and where the northeast, where we're pretty close to the area that, where we touch the northeast. So we're on the outskirts of the southeast and the northeast all at one time. But, we have within the southeast, there's 4 different species of ticks, which we've already talked about. There's 4 also in the northeast, but if you go over across the thing, you can see it, there's different numbers that are available northwest and southeast. And the bar chart at the bottom of each one of those little things talks about the average susceptibility or the average risk that's out there. And everybody basically is above average, either slightly or significantly above average. The Midwest is actually considered the hot spot right now, where the risk is the highest. Upper Midwest, that's spreading down into the lower Midwest at this point. But you can also see that almost everybody there has a very high level of risk based on the way that bar comes across the screen there. So it's not just our problem. And the one thing about it is that if you go across the country, you just need to be aware that there are other tick species that are available and they could carry other diseases. So as we move, I expect to see more cross-contamination, more ticks move from one place to another. And eventually we're possibly going to be looking at additional species that we have to deal with here, or varieties. This was another question that we had, and that's, are ticks bad in Virginia or here in Warren County? And well, if you ask the Virginia Department of Health, the northern counties of the state are where the highest reports of density of ticks are, and the highest number of reports are for Lyme disease. And you could come up with a lot of different reasons on why that might be, from numbers of people to the closeness of doctors and willingness of people to go to seek medical attention, to numbers of ticks being actually greater hotspots in the availability of the viruses and things through the tick community. They're all probably reasons for that, but they do identify the northern counties of the state. And if you looked at that picture that I showed earlier with it being in the Nova area, I don't identify that as true to Virginia. I think this is true because we're more north than them. But the simple fact is those yellows and reds have moved on out to the west and they now incorporate it. So yes, we are at a higher risk than some other places in the state and around the country. One of the reasons why we have issues is the moderate to warm climates and great humidity. They make great tick breeding grounds. Lyme disease is the most commonly reported tick-borne disease in the state. But residents are also really risk. The next biggest one is Rocky Mountain spotted. We're going to move on to hopefully some things for you to think about. And I know this is a little confusing, but I thought it was pretty neat. And that's tick season, and we're in the middle of it. So you need to be vigilant, or and check yourself. These are not to scale pictures, and I didn't do this work, so I'm not just telling you. I couldn't draw this because stick people and things don't look the same. But there are things you can do, and one of those things is to wear long pants, tuck into your boots, socks, long sleeves, things like that. You don't want to have exposed skin or places that are going to collect the ticks. Allow them in. So like even if you're wearing shoes that have eyelets in them, that can be an issue because the ticks can crawl in through those. So you just don't expect that. You could also use I know it's not a cool or hip thing to do, but you could create a bigger seal by using tape, duct tape, masking tape, something like that, between where your clothes happen to join and come in contact. So the key to it is to really try to make sure you're protected. The next best thing is to do a tick check. And I know some people think about it and say, well, I was really in a high risk area, so maybe I'm going to do it this time, but they don't really get in the habit of it, which means that there are a significant number of times when it is not done. And those can usually be the times when, you unfortunately get your exposure. But do a tick check within an hour of the time you get home. All over your body, with your hair, and particularly armpits, feet, places that you have a hard time seeing or feel. But it's important to do that. You want to wear clothes that are treated for prometheus. And people have different feelings about that. Some are anti-chemical, some are, I want to put something simply holistic on it or organic, I want to do this or that. The research basically shows that permethrins, different types, are the most effective things you can put on. There are certainly other things that you can put on that are going to help you treat so that you're resistant to ticks. And that's the whole point. It's to be diligent with trying to put something on out there that in some cases it's going to kill ticks if they happen to get into contact with it. And in other cases, it's going to be just trying to retard them. But you want to have something in there as a barrier. You want to treat your clothes outside. You want to do it the night before in the house or anything like that. Leave them in the house without going to launder or being taken care of. Similar permethrins and other items, you could be kind of, smelly or noxious, cause headaches and things like that. So we're going to try to minimize that while maximizing the strength of the chemical before you go out to the high contact area. You want to basically use insect repellents whenever you can. And then on your skin, things like DEET or other chemicals can really provide assistance if they're not water soluble and you're not going to be doing a lot of head activity when they rinse off. Then you have to remember that the nymphal season is April through June, and that's what we consider the majority of it. It can change a little bit depending on weather, environmental conditions, but that's when we really focus on it. And these things are hard to spot because they're small. So you may not think you have a problem, but you very well could. Think about where they live. They live in places that are like mice and deer and mammals and other things. So if you're going to come in contact with either locations where those animals have a tendency to trespass or stay, or you're going to be coming in contact with them specifically, doing hunting or trapping or anything like that, you're going to be at higher risk, and you need to consider yourself that way and try to put forth the best effort possible to protect yourself. The habitat for ticks is in areas that are the edge of woods, mostly, and long grasses, places that are kind of very, I guess, untended is the best way to put it. They like areas that people don't like to traverse because they're trying to get up on the blades of grass. They're trying to get up on the other plants and things to where they can attach to mammals and get their needed blood supply. So what you're going to try to do
The
is...
library closes in 30 minutes. The computers will be shutting down in 15 minutes. If you have anything to save to a flash drive, do so soon. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, sorry about that, folks. Basically, it's just know that when you're going to go into areas that are less tended like that or higher risk, that you have to do a better job of putting together precautionary information and practices that you have to put in place. excuse me, there are other things to know. A couple of these things are repetitive, but Promethean spray and clothing, according to manufacturer's directions, is the single most important thing. It is considered the best by all models that we have, and that's to include pants, shirts, socks, hats, coats, and underwear. Now, if you have a reaction to it, make sure that you don't. You want to maybe try to make sure that you don't use them on every piece of clothing for the first time until you know that you're not going to develop a rash or have some kind of reaction. But the spray must be totally dry before clothes are put on. DEET, and that's the way you spell it, DEET. Most people see it in a lot of products, but you remember that you need 20% or greater in the formulation and to be useful. But you don't want to rely on these things alone. You want to continue to do the frequent inspection of yourself, your children, your pets in areas, especially after you're undressing and so forth, like that. Particularly, they're very small and easy to miss. Here's one that a lot of people don't think about. That is that you can kill the rim blankets from on clothes in a dryer. And that is put them on in a dryer for 20 to 30 minutes on medium to high heat. And usually that will kill any ticks that attach to them. So you can come in from the outside, put those clothing or things in there, and effectively clean them off and be able to put them away. Worry about where you were and whether or not you will bring it into your house. We don't encourage people to encourage deer or other mammals to eat in their yard. So if you're feeding corn or you're feeding things that are for the squirrels or whatever else, you might want to consider that that is a vector that could potentially bring them into your area. You want to clear brush litter from around your yard that way. So although being all natural and keeping things very rustic is very nice, it increases your risk. So you have to find a balance. You want to talk to your veterinarian about tick protection products that you use for your pets, because dogs and other types of pets can bring into your home or into your yard. That is one area that we normally find is a pretty good way to move them from point A to point B. Dogs have a tendency to go a lot of places while they're, especially if you're allowed to run free. We'll check out your nooks and crannies and unfortunately usually get some attachments from time to time. And then if you find that you have been in a tick infested area and experienced an illness or rash, it's imperative to take a position about your tick exposure. What to do if you're bitten by a tick? And that's one of the most frequently asked questions. That's okay, how do you remove it? It's the process, or is bitten the skin? There's a couple of things with it. You want to expose the tick gently by pulling back any hair or things that might be covering it. If it's on your head or other places, you want to clean those out of the way so that it's easier to get to. You want to use a pair of fine tip tweezers, grasp its head if you can. Don't grasp its body, as this causes the tick's blood to be injected back into the skin. That's definitely not what we want to do in case it's a tick that's carrying one of those diseases that we talked about. You want to pull the tick's head from the skin, and don't be twisting it or wiggling it and that kind of thing, because you're more apt to break it off that way. After the tick is removed, dispose in a trash receptacle and flush it down the toilet. Then wash the mark using soap and water. And then if you develop a fever or particularly a bullseye start to come around that area of the bite, you want to consult your physician. We talked about that a little bit in the last thing, but you want to, as soon as you notice it, you don't want to leave it there any longer than you know that it's there. Usually it takes somewhere around, depending upon the disease, it takes anywhere from 24 to probably 48 hours for a tick to get to the point where they are not only, they're traversing fluids from themselves to you back. And that's when you're at risk. So the earlier you can collect them, the earlier you get them off, the greater your chance of not having any problems is going to be. That's really all I have. You know, ticks are something we have to live with. They are present. They are sort of a danger. But if we do the right steps or take the right steps to protect ourselves and we follow up on those things, we can hopefully minimize that risk and everything can be very happy and we can all be healthy.
Thank you. That was great. Very informative, and you bring up a lot of good points for us all to consider, especially if we're out in, I know my dogs brought them in even from our yard. You know, we didn't have to be in the national park or the national forest or any of the state parks. You know, right there in my own backyard, there they are. So I guess maybe, Erin, we can open it up to any questions that anybody has that are out there. So we'll see if anybody has any questions for us.
I guess in the meantime, I have a question, Corey. So talking about removing ticks, do you recommend taking the tick if you think it may have, I don't know, you think it has Lyme disease? Do you recommend taking it to a lab? And if so, is there a local lab that people can take the ticks to? 'Cause I get this question asked a lot, like, where can I take this tick?
Honestly, if you want to have the tick ID, you can come to us. Basically, we can ID it for you.
In terms of what type of tick it is?
Usually,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
I mean, most people, if you learn what the characteristics are, when you have a super strong magnifying glass or microscope, you're going to be able to you're going to be able to just tell what it is.
Right.
But if you don't know, you're not sure, you can bring it to us to identify. There is no method to tell if that tick is carrying a disease.
Right.
There's no lab to send it to. They're not going to be able to test it or anything like that. You simply have to go, okay, now that I know what it is, you know, if it's a brown dog tick or if it's a spotted tick or whatever, you know it's probably not going to be carrying. So then your level of concern should go down
Sure.
to a certain extent. So you may or may not want to be very diligent. You want to, okay, it's circling the tick bite, and you want to know, is that a rash or spreading, or is it just?
Right.
And then as it expands through whatever the area that you identify is, you go, it's spreading, I need to go to the doctor. The doctor is going to put you on a treatment for the most common thing. If you identify what species the tick is, be able to treat for. But unfortunately, there's not really a lab or anything that's going to be able to know, yes, this is carrying this or this is carrying that, because
Okay.
they don't have that sort of capability.
Now, speaking of identification of ticks, what do you guys find most common in product? Ticks most common?
Probably most people know what dog ticks look like,
Right.
and don't worry about that. So
Okay.
we don't get those as often.
Okay.
Or we get some. The last 2 or 3 years, what we've really seen has been deer ticks. And obviously the longhorn tick was brought into us. I didn't know that. I've never seen it before. And it didn't fit any of our IP models.
Yeah.
So that was identified and sent back to me. So, hey, now we have to start this whole diagnostic process. How to get here? But usually it's the Lone Star and deer.
Okay. And have you seen more ticks recently over the years, or is it just kind of?
Yeah, we have seen more. And I think that's for a couple of different reasons. I truly believe there are more of them in the environment. But I also believe, and people are getting out into places where they are. So the exposure is there. But people know that Lyme's out there. It's becoming a much more major player in the things we're aware of. And people are more concerned. So that all combination means that, yeah, we get quite a few more.
People are bringing them in and having you identify them and asking them questions.
Yeah, it's not uncommon at all for somebody to go to their local physician saying, hey, I've got this tick. And the doctor doesn't know what type of tick it is. So they send them to us. So they go to one of you guys and they'll come that way as well. So yeah, overall, the numbers are much higher. And it's not a big deal. Unfortunately, I work in many counties, so I'm not there all the time. So it might not be an immediate diagnosis. You might have to leave there or something like that. But when we come in, look, we'll get right back.
If you're bringing one in, just like a Ziploc bag,
The best way that I like to have, if you have a little vial or something that you put a little alcohol in and put it in,
okay,
just so it doesn't dry out and get more desiccated. Because I've had them brought to me before where they were bits and pieces,
sure.
and that's much harder. I've had them brought to me before and they're still moving, and that's also pretty hard. I don't want to leave my office.
Right.
Kind of a thing. So Ziploc bags worth it if they're sealed. I've had them come in pill containers and all kinds of things,
Okay.
as long as they are contained. But the rubbing alcohol works really well to kill them and to also preserve.
Okay.
All right, looks like we have somebody from the chat. Do ticks other than dog ticks get engorged?
Yes, they just don't show it the same way. With a dog tick, you can see that they'll blow up, kind of like a balloon if you leave them long enough. Many of the other ticks will get it fully engorged, will change colors. As the blood or the hemoglobin goes in and have all that redness or dark redness that goes into them, they will mix with their natural color and become much darker. They'll get bigger, but you usually don't find too many of them blow up like the dog tick does.
All right, if we have any more questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. Otherwise, you can also unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question as well.
I had another question. So if someone was really afraid of ticks, what places in Warren County would you tell them to avoid? Where's the most prevalent place? Or is there one?
There really isn't one. I guess you could say there is. I mean, if you go hiking out in national parks, or you go to some area that's not really has people and it's more it's grown up and has a lot of brush and things in it, that probably is more dangerous than being out in the middle of the soccer playfield in the park. But that doesn't mean that there's not ticks there too.
Sure.
Right.
So you just have to be aware of your environment and where you're going to be, and the more unencumbered areas, the ones that are less taken care of, are usually places where there's probably going to be a larger.
Okay, I didn't know if you just one spot.
No, it does vary from year to year too on where we're seeing them. People
Yeah.
come in, it's like when they tell us where they're from, it's like, well, this year they might be from this part of the county, and then next year there will more of them seem to be coming in from this part of it. So I don't think there is a real correlation between that. I think it just has to be the activity level and where they go.
Stay on the trail.
If you can stay on the trail and keep yourself out of tall weeds, you're
better off.
much better off.
All right, looks like we have a couple more. So if the family dog is tested positive for Lyme disease, should we be having the family checked as well, or just be more vigilant?
Well, there's not any real reason for people to check or to have the family checked if there have been no symptoms. And the symptoms would begin with ticks found in other people or areas where they develop some sort of a spot or an issue, rash, to be there. For total security, if you have plenty of money, I guess you can go testing just to be sure. But the fact that your dog comes down with Lyme or has it is not an indicator that you have one of your family members. There has to be more.
All right, and does wet weather affect ticks?
Yeah.
Evening, patrons. The library closes in 15 minutes. If you have anything to check out, please proceed to circulation. Thank you.
Yes, it does. And the one thing that ticks have to have is work. They really can withstand some drier periods. They have to have water. And if we have wet weather and it stays humid, then it creates perfect growing conditions. So it affects them positively if we have more water, and then if it's drier and there's a little little more along the way, or areas where there might be a little shade, or, around tree lines where it's more moisture naturally, or creeks or streams or things, yeah, you're gonna increase in.
All right, and next question, do cats get Lyme disease as well?
I personally haven't heard of a cat that has it, but I would think that's probably because I haven't had anybody come to me and say, I've had my cat tested. People usually are more worried about their dogs. Most cats are inside versus outside, so there's less risk to many of them. But they're a mammal, and I would assume that if dogs can actually carry it, that it's potentially possible for a cat to get it too. But I'm not a vet, and I can't answer that specifically.
All right. All right, any more last minute questions?
Okay, well, we really appreciate, again, everybody's questions and your participation. And I believe Erin said this is going to be posted to
Yes, so this meeting was recorded, so anybody who's coming late, you can catch it again. I'll be sending out the link to anybody who's registered once we have it available up on YouTube, and we'll be doing a Facebook video premiere as well.
So friends and family that may or may not be interested could view this also through the library website, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great. Well, again, Erin, thank you so much for working with us. Corey, we appreciate you coming and all of the information you've given us. Our goal is to help spread the word about Lyme disease and the various comorbidities, co-diseases that go with it, and to really boost our prevention here in Warren County so we all can stay healthy and enjoy the great outdoors, whether you're hiking, gardening, walking your dog, or kayaking on the river. Let's get out there and enjoy it, but hopefully be safe while we're doing that. Thank you also, Jody, who helped start this Lyme and tick disease support group. We appreciate all your efforts. And did you want to real quick say anything about the Healing Lyme book? So this is one of our standard books that we do recommend. I'm not sure they have it here at the library. I think at one time they were going to get one, but this is a great place to start for information. It's called Healing Lyme, and it's by Steven Buhner, B-U-H-N-E-R. So you can also check that out. Maybe even check it out here. All right. So thank you so much. We again appreciate everybody's participation, and we hope everybody has a great evening. Take care.